Welcome to the Hangover Podcast, where we romance all things that go bump in the night. I'm Francesca from Under the Covers book blog, and I'm joined by
Suzanne, also from Under the Covers book blog. And today we also have a special guest joining us.
Hailey Turner.
So Hailey is actually our first author guest on The Hangover. So thank you so much, Hailey, for stopping by today and letting us pick your brain a little bit. We are actually going to be talking all things urban fantasy recommendations today, because that's basically what Hailey's new series or ongoing series is. She writes the Soulbound series, which I've been talking about since probably episode 1 of the podcast, and I just convinced Suzanne to start reading it. So feel good about that. So we're going to also talk about urban fantasy, what the genre is and why we love it so much, and give you guys also some recommendations. And we'll talk about the Soulbound series a little bit more as well.
Yep, so I'm so excited for this because you know that urban fantasy is like one of my favourite genres, and it's what led me to romance as well. So before we go in and start fangirling over Hailey's series and all the other series that we love, I thought I would kind of define the parameters of what, like, at least when I say urban fantasy, like the kind of books that I mean. I've actually done a few posts on Under the Covers and videos as well on YouTube. If you know, a small plug, if you wanted to check those out, talking about how I define kind of urban fantasy and like how this relates to high fantasy and low fantasy in general. So urban fantasy is also called low fantasy. And urban fantasy doesn't necessarily have to have romance. The story is driven forward by the main plot, the adventure, the journey, whatever it aims it is to stop the evil from taking over is generally the general theme of like what a fantasy book is. And it's called low fantasy or urban fantasy because it's generally set in this world, unlike a high fantasy, which will be a world completely made up by like that particular author. So it'll be set like in this world, but it'll have a magical twist or element. It might have like paranormal creatures in it. It might have magic in it. It might have a mixture of all those things. But the important things, I guess, for us as like a romance podcast is that you can have an urban fantasy without romance in it, and it's still an urban fantasy. It's not like the main point of the story isn't that the characters get together at the end. The point of the story is that it defeat the big bad, you know, like ultimately through the series or in the book. So that's what we'll be talking about. I mean, to be honest, most of the urban fantasy series I love have a heavy romance element in them, but the romance isn't the point of the story. It's the like other plot lines that are driving it forward. So that's kind of my blather about what urban fantasy is. So I don't know if Francesca, you have anything that you'd like to like add to my general ramblings?
No, I think you pretty much covered how I see urban fantasy. And at least for me, it does have to have the romance element. And it's fine that it's in the background, and it's fine if the characters don't get together in the first book, because I love seeing that journey. And it's one of the few genres where I don't mind that. But yeah, definitely all the ones that I like have a strong element of romance, like Hailey's series that we're going to be talking about.
I agree with Suzanne's assessment of it. That's technically how I view paranormal romance versus urban fantasy. Paranormal romance, the romance is very much front and center, and that drives the plot, whereas with urban fantasy I feel it's the external plot, it's the world, it's the, you know, the evil, like you said, is what's driving the plot. And you can have romance in urban fantasy, but it's not necessarily going to be the center spotlight of it, and you can take it out or leave it in, and it's still going to remain an urban fantasy. Whereas if you remove the romance in a paranormal romance, it's not really a paranormal romance anymore. And so I agree with Suzanne and how she described it.
Thank you. I'm glad that an author agrees with like how I define a genre. And I mean, I guess it's important or not important. I think the reason that I like to know how I define genres is that if I'm looking to pick up a book and it says it's an urban fantasy, then I have a certain set of expectations. Yeah, if it then turns out to be a paranormal romance, that means that it wasn't actually quite what I wanted. And the same if I pick up a an urban fantasy. Oh no, the opposite way around. I've forgotten what I just said. But yeah, it just
if you pick up an urban fantasy, but you were looking for a paranormal romance, most likely, even if it's good one, you're going to be a little disappointed because it's not what you were in the mood
for. Because I wanted that satisfaction of having the HEA at the end. So, I mean, that's kind of why knowing what genre something is important to me. And it's not because I'm picky and I think, oh, you must define it this way. It just helps set expectations and like helps me decide what I'm going to read and what I want to buy. And I don't want to like be missold something almost.
Reader's expectation of a genre is very important in terms of just writing it, because if I'm going to write an urban fantasy, I want to hit all of those tropes and all of those beats for the reader who is expecting that versus a reader who might be expecting a paranormal romance, because they are different in terms of writing. And, you know, I want to be true to the genre for the reader versus, you know, doing a bait and switch or something, which I think I would never do. But, you know, the reader is expecting something if they pick up an urban fantasy book, and they're expecting something if they pick up a paranormal book.
So how do you kind of decide? Because the Soulbound series does have romance in it, and there is, I mean, I've only read the first book so far, which I really enjoyed, but you've got the two, like Patrick and...
Jono.
I was like, John. No, it's not John. So you have those two main characters who are like a couple. So how do you decide like how much of the romance you put into it as opposed to like you said, like the external like conflict?
Because there's a lot of world building, and there is definitely an underlying heavy plot that's running through all 7 books. The romance, you know, is important, and technically, you know, if you took it out, it wouldn't really hold up with the rest of the story. But from the structure standpoint of writing it, it's very much in the urban fantasy realm versus a paranormal, at least from my opinion of it. And I've heard readers call it, you know, like an urban fantasy romance, because it's very much heavy in the urban fantasy genre. But there is a romance, and, you know, I wrote it that way because the relationships between Patrick and Jono and, you know, the found family with their pack and everything is very integral to the plot that I came up with. And, you know, you kind of need that emotional connection for the reader. It's a bit dry if you don't have something for the reader to just, you know, sink their teeth into relationship-wise, whether it's a friendship or if it's a romance.
Agreed.
Yeah, I like character-driven stories. So it's nice to have like that balance of both, where the external plot is driven a bit by the like relationships between the characters. And
also in your world, you cover so many different aspects. Like I love like the mythology that you incorporate in each book. Like it's like reading a completely different thing because you're opening up a different chapter, I guess, of the world building. So was that intentional, like when you set out to write the Soulbound series, or did it just like develop as you were writing different installments?
I love mythology. Like I've been reading mythology and urban legends and things like that from a very young age. I think I was reading like the Greek myths when I was, I don't know, like 7 or 8 or something. It's always just been something that I've really, really loved, and I've always wanted to do a story around it. But I also didn't want to just stick with the very well-known myths, because there's a lot of mythology out there, and there's, you know, a lot of connections between a lot of the creation myths in a lot of different cultures. So that's always been really fascinating, and I just like bringing those rarer stories into, you know, for readers to see, because I've gotten a lot of reader comments. You know, they say they never heard of that god before, they never heard of that myth before, and they went looking it up just to see because it was so interesting. But, you know, the fact that they didn't know about it beforehand just, you know, kind of reinforces my plan from the beginning of just to bring all these different mythologies in. So yes, it was very much planned. It was a different myth for, you know, each book, really, but all of the side myth characters as well coming in. And it's been a lot of fun. Like, I get to do a lot of research. I love mythology and just things like that. So it's like, okay, I can spend, you know, a weekend reading a mythology book, and it's considered work.
I love that. It's actually one of my favorite aspects of the series is the fact that you do incorporate all these myths that are not necessarily like the mainstream that every urban fantasy or young adult about mythology just rehashes the same stuff. So I really appreciate that. And I think so also something else that Suzanne and I were talking about that we really appreciate about the romance aspect is how it's a male-male relationship, and you make it seem so like seamless. Is like it's not a big deal. It's not like some of the male-male romances where I guess they focus more on the fact that it's like a separate thing, and you made it just normal, which I really, really appreciate. And we were just talking about that the other day.
Yeah, I think for romance, it depends on how the author is writing it. If it's going to be like a coming out story, or if it's going to just be part of the romance. And both are really, those are really good takes for an author to take on a romance. But I wanted for Soulbound to just, Patrick is what he is. And I didn't want to do like a coming out story on top of everything else. I felt from a plot point of view that might have just been a little over the top. So I made the choice to not have that be part of the plot outline for this series.
I think it's just nice having like a gay character as the main protagonist in a story outside almost of the romance genre, as it's just, I think it just like normalizes things, and it's quite progressive in that way. So I kind of liked seeing like a gay main character outside of like the romance genre, although obviously there is romance in it, but it's the fact that it's a gay romance kind of has nothing to do with the story almost. It just is what it is.
I love urban fantasy, and I would just read it all the time growing up, but there was never any queer protagonist. The publishing industry has gotten a lot better in recent years for that, but it still has a long way to go. And I made a solid decision and a choice of when I was going to write this book, there was going to be a queer main character and a queer relationship spotlighted. And you don't really see that very often in urban fantasy, simply because the protagonists tend to be male and straight and first person point of view when you're reading it. And I'm writing queer third person point of view. So, from a stricture point of view, it's different. And, maybe at the time it was a little bit of risk, but it was the story of my heart. So I was going to write it how I wanted to write it from my head. And that's how I came with 7 books that I've been working on for like 4 years at this point.
And I quite liked, because most of when we go on to our recommendations, I think all of mine are first person, but I really liked that it was third person because you got both Jono and Patrick. I mean, I don't know if this continues in the other book, but in the first book you had both Jono and Patrick's like point of view, and it was nice to see get to know both of them.
It remains that way for the remainder of the series. Book 1 is very much it's like 3/4 Patrick, maybe 5/6 Patrick's point of view, and a little bit of Jonah's point of view, but it becomes more balanced from book 2 onwards. They pretty much split almost evenly the point of view for each book.
So we've touched a little bit about your inspiration and your choices in writing the series, but for a new reader that maybe hasn't dived into the series, what can they expect? What's the series generally about besides mythology, and why should they pick it up?
I generally describe it as if you took Dresden Files and mixed it with American Gods and kind of shook it up with some queer love. That's what you get with Soulbound. It's got the urban fantasy, but it also has a lot of the mythology, and it also has a lot of character relationship growth, like the found family trope. That's my favorite trope to write. Like you're going to get every book from me, and everybody's going to be looking for their own little family. And it's generally Patrick coming to terms with his lot in life, and Jono trying to make sure that he stays alive. So epic adventure, very action-packed oriented. I've had readers say that it's like a movie in a book. So if you like a lot of explosions and sarcasm and people not quite dying, but
I love those things. I was going to say one of my favorite things is all the like things blowing up.
I love blowing stuff up. It's like if I'm not blowing something up in a book, I'll have to go back and be like, oh wait, no, I need to blow something up in this chapter.
I know Suzanne is partial to beheadings, though.
Any kind of weird violence, like in a book, I'm all for it. Also, if you like red-headed heroes as well, which I know is a thing that people love, then Patrick is your man. Yeah, or British heroes, because Jono's from the UK. Okay,
Suzanne, you have to give us like your opinion. How was the British representation? Because she always has something to say. So
that's normally if it's an audiobook. That's normally if it's an audiobook and I'm having to listen to some really bad British accent. But no, I thought it was fine. Like, nothing jarred me, and I'm like, that's not what I would say, or whatever. So, no, it was all good.
I will say that I did have my friend Lily Morton like Brit pick for me. I was like, would you just say this? And she's like, no, that's too American. I was like, okay, how would you say it then?
Well, it worked out.
No, yeah. So I didn't notice anything, so that was good. So in our last series, we read Night Huntress, where Bones, the hero, is British. And I was going to listen to the audiobooks, but I couldn't because Bones just sounded like Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins. And I'm just like, no, it will take all the sexiness out if I have to listen to this.
That's what I was telling Lily. I was just like, make me not sound like Dick Van Dyke. She made sure I didn't sound like Dick Van Dyke. It's been a running joke between her and I for this entire series.
So I guess we can get into our urban fantasy recommendations and see what series we have enjoyed reading in the past. Suzanne, why don't you get us started? Because I know you're like itching to fangirl.
I don't know what you are talking about. So it's kind of been a thing in the Fangover that in every episode I mention a certain author and maybe even a certain series. And this episode has given me the perfect opportunity to legit talk about it and not have like Francesca like scowl and roll her eyes at me.
I don't do that.
I mean, obviously this is a podcast, so you can't see her, but she definitely does. She definitely does. So, obviously the one I'm talking about is the Kate Daniels series by Ilona Andrews. And I guess one of the reasons I love this series is because it was actually my gateway to romance. Like, before I had read Ilona Andrews, there wasn't really any books that I had read which were had really had romance in them. But also I love it just because I love the world, I love the characters. Obviously my ultimate book boyfriend, Curran, is in this book. Kate Daniels, the heroine, is like my favourite heroine as well. I don't know how much detail to go into because this could just be an hour of me talking about the Kate Daniels series.
We'll schedule that episode for another day.
Yeah, just me monologuing about the Kate Daniels series.
I don't even have to show up for that recording.
No,
it's just going to be Suzanne talking straight for an hour.
But yeah, so it's urban fantasy. It has like a romance element in it. It has a lot of action. It has a Saki heroine who kind of grows throughout the series, and it kind of gradually, she starts out as a loner, but she like gradually kind of gathers this group of people as things go up. So there's an overarching story. It's a finished series now in the series, but each book has its own contained story, which has a beginning and an end, which like pushes forward the overarching one. And it's amazing, and I love it, and everyone should read it and love it too, otherwise we can't be friends. And I will stop talking about it now because, as I said, I will just monologue for the rest of the episode about it. So I don't know.
She forgot about all her other series. It's like one track mind, Ilona Andrews.
It so is.
But I mean, I think that just speaks of the book series if, it gets you to love it that much.
I am seriously obsessed with it. I have it in every single format that is available to me. And I reread it all the time.
That for me is Patricia Briggs's Mercy Thompson series. That's like one of my absolute all-time favorite ones. And so I've got it in paperback. I've got it in hardback.
I love that series.
Yeah, that's such a great one. I love that. And the like companion series, the Alpha and Omega series as well. I love both of those. They're so good. So, Francesca, what series would you like to fangirl about? Like, it's now your turn to fangirl.
Well, I do like to fangirl about The Hollows by Kim Harrison. And that is also a finished series. And it's kind of weird because when I read the first book, I almost DNF'd it because it's slow. And, you know, I don't do slow books too much. So I was really struggling. I almost didn't finish it. I pushed. And then there were a few things about that first book that just really interested me. And I wanted to keep reading. And it was the best decision ever. Because that series took me on this roller coaster. Of course, I was reading it pretty much when they were coming out, so it was like a year between each one of the books, and sometimes they would end in some not so good places where I was like, I need the next book immediately. And
cliffhanger.
I know, and I loved it because the main protagonist of the series is not a perfect heroine by any means, so I really like that aspect. Like, she was always doing something really screwed up, or not necessarily even that it's romance heavy. I would say there is a thread of a romance throughout the whole series, but even the Kate Daniels or Mercy Thompson have a much stronger romance than the Hollows. So I'm surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did, but it was a really unique world with magic and demons and all these ley lines and all this stuff. So I really, really enjoyed it. It was quite unique, and I don't think I've read something else that's quite like that, with that type of heroine and that mix of romance, non-romance. So I really enjoyed that series.
So Hailey, you spoke about like the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. Is that kind of the series that got you into urban fantasies, or like what other urban fantasies if would you like recommend to people?
Mercy Thompson is my top one that I'll recommend to people, especially readers who want more romance in it. I kind of cut my teeth reading on urban fantasy. I'm going to date myself here, but like the first maybe like 9 novels of the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series by Little K. Hamilton, like years ago, and also when the Dresden Files first started coming out, I was reading those quite often. Those are the ones that I really cut my teeth on. And then later once the genre kind of broke open a little bit, with all the other ones coming in, I would read those. But those 3 are typically the ones that I know that I first started reading, and I can remember. I was like, okay, yeah, that's where my love of urban fantasy sort of sprouted up from.
So the Dresden Files is a series I've always meant to read, and I've read the first book and I enjoyed it. But it's like, it was so weird to read a book where the character doesn't have a mobile phone. And I think at one point he was looking in the phone book for something, and like, I'm just like, oh, why doesn't he he doesn't have a mobile phone because they weren't invented yet, or they weren't like in common use anyway. Yeah. And it was just
it's so hard to date. Sometimes, like, you write stuff and you're like, okay, if I'm going to write this, am I going to date myself in like 5 years? Yeah. Like, is this technology still going to exist in 5 years?
Yeah. I mean, it didn't take away from like the main story, because that was great and I enjoyed it. But it was just every now and again they would say something and I'm like, oh, wow. Phone book? What's this? What's the yellow pages? But no, but I did enjoy that. It's one of those ones that I mean it. Have you watched the TV series? Because they did like was it just like one series of the Dresden Files?
Yeah, just one season.
I remember liking it. I remember liking the lead actor.
Yeah.
I really liked the first season of American Gods when it came out. And the second season was a bit all over the place in certain areas, but I still liked it. And I know the third season is coming out soon, so I'm like excited for that. but I can't watch it until I finish writing the current last
Yeah.
book in the series.
Yeah.
Like, I don't let myself like read too much or watch, TV or fantasy and stuff when I'm writing it, because I'm like, I don't want to osmosis anything, but also I'm like,
Yeah.
that's my carrot. And so if I finish a chapter, or if I finish a book, then I can immerse myself into all the things that I've been holding back as, my prize for finishing something.
Because isn't American Gods based on a Neil Gaiman's book? And is it? I thought American Gods, was just one book. Am I wrong? But they've stretched it into 3 series.
I don't know, since the 3rd series isn't out yet. I don't know where it ends in terms of the book. So I don't know how many seasons they're contracted for.
Okay.
But it's interesting how they've done it, because it doesn't feel as much of a filler episodes as I thought it would be, considering that they're just drawing it from one book, because they tend to go in a little bit into the gods' pasts and everything, which is, I'm totally here for that.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't read American Gods. I've only read a couple by Neil Gaiman, and that isn't one of them. But I'm always like, oh, but there's only one book, and yet they've stretched it out for this many series. They can't be much of the source content left. But never mind. So my next recommendation, if you either have read Hailey's series, and liked it, or you've read the series I'm about to talk about, then you'll probably like Hailey's series. So, and that is the Cassie Palmer series by Karen Chance. And the reason I say that they're if you like one, you'll probably like the other, is because Karen Chance's books, you need to take a deep breath before you start, because once you start, it's a roller coaster. You're jumping in from one disaster to a catastrophe with honestly, not a breath between. It's insane. And I feel like Hailey's book Soulbound was really action packed, and Karen Chance's Cassie Palmer series is also really action packed. So there are I think there are 7 or 8 books in this series, and there's just so much happening in these books. So there's something you absolutely have to read in order, otherwise they will make no sense at all. And then when I worked out how much time had passed in these 8 books, it was something ridiculous, 4 weeks. And I'm just oh my God, so much has happened. Cassie needs to take a holiday. So Cassie Palmer, as you might guess from her name, is a seer. And there's there's vampires in this, there's mages, there are werewolves as well, but they don't really feature so much in the main stories. But it's interesting the way that vampires are set up with the courts and stuff. And it's the only book in existence with a love triangle where I actually like the love triangle. I am Team Pritkin for anyone who's for anyone who has read this series. I am firmly on Team Pritkin, although I would definitely bang the shit out of Mercia as well. But for Cassie, I like Pritkin, who is mild spoiler, skip ahead 15 seconds, who is half mage, half incubus, and real grumpy as well, which is what I like about him. And then when you have Mercia, who's this really smooth, vampire, diplomat, who's also a bit of a badass and related to Dracula. Or Vlad, rather. But no, it's really great. So it mixes up a bit of mythology as well. So that's another connection to Hailey's series. The gods are also a bit of a bastard as well in this series, much like in a Hailey's as well. So it mixes up mythology and then vampire lore, and there's some really interesting magic use in there as well. So yeah, the Cassie Palmer series by Karen Chance, I feel is a really underrated series, but it's so good, especially if you like action and a bit of time travel as well. I forgot to mention the time travel. I would recommend it. You might like it, Francesca, because honestly, you like quick moving plots, and this is the one for you.
I'll have to give it a try. I've had actually book 1 on my TBR for ages.
Yeah.
It's just been sitting.
Yeah.
So another series that I like, which is not quite, I would say it's a mix between paranormal romance and urban fantasy, because it goes back and forth with the definition that we talked about before. It's the Women of the Otherworld series by Kelly Armstrong. And that's because it's mainly shifter stories, but there are demons and there are vampires and there's magic. But a few of the main romance, I guess, leads, some of them get a few books, some of them get just the one book, and that's the HEA, so those are pretty romance heavy. So it really depends which one you pick up, so you have a little bit of everything. It's definitely a series more for the heavier romance reader than, say, like a Kate Daniels. But I really enjoyed it. It has a ton of badass women, all in different ways, because there's also the ones that are a little bit more subdued, but they're still badass in their own way, like Paige, for example.
My favorite.
So, yeah, I think that it has really great alpha heroes and plenty of action. It's probably not quite as action-packed as you just said, the Cassie Palmer series.
Nothing is.
Yeah. But yeah, I really enjoy it.
I love that series as well. I still haven't read it all, though.
It is a finished series, though. So
I know. I should get on with it. It's also the only series that I know of which has a romance between two ghosts.
Yeah.
I cannot think of another book where there's like a romance between two ghosts. But yeah, it's one of my favourites. Do you have any more recommendations for us, Hailey?
I have a couple on my to be read pile that I'm not allowed to read until like I finish book 7. The first one it's a young adult, actually. I'm really excited for it. Lore by Alexandra Bracken, and it's like Greek mythology, but like Hunger Games-esque.
Okay.
It's really, really cool sounding story, and I'm super excited to read that. I haven't yet because I'm not done writing. And then I did get to read some time ago Emmy Grant's upcoming Rare Vigilance, which is a very slow burn urban fantasy that's going to come out this summer through Carina Press. It's really, really good if you love, slow burn. So I got a sneak peek of that, and that was fun. And then for the other to be read is actually one of my old writing friends. He's putting out his young adult urban fantasy. It's called The Princess Electric, and so that's like on top of my to be read pile. But currently that's what it is, and I can't read anything until I finish writing. It's like I have my my Mount Everest to be read pile, and I'm like looking at it, I'm like I could read it, but I'm like my word count isn't done yet.
I like that you're rewarding yourself with like, if I finish this, then I can read some books. Yeah,
it's a good incentive.
It is a good incentive. My usual incentive is chocolate, but books also work.
Yeah, if I give myself incentive with food, like that's nothing, because I'll just eat it anyways. It's like, there's no saving it, like it's gonna keep. Whereas with a book, I'm like, no, I can convince myself that I can wait for it. Whereas if it's food, no.
I'm the same. If there's chocolate in my house, then it's immediately in my belly, because I can't. I can't just like leave it. It's just there calling to me.
I am the same.
It's why I don't have chocolate in the house. Otherwise, that would just be the 100% of my diet. Would just be like chocolate for breakfast, chocolate for dinner, chocolate for tea.
That's like chocolate and bread and potatoes, or like chips or anything like that. They don't live in my house.
Yeah.
I'm all for the bread.
Oh no, a packet
Anything
of salt
salty.
and vinegar.
Salt and vinegar chips.
The best. The best. Oh, guys, you're making me hungry.
Isn't it dinner time where you are? You can, order some.
Oh, don't say that. But I'm terrible at ordering because I don't order enough for one. I order enough for a family of 6 and then eat like 50% of it. This is why I should exercise. Okay, so also talking about heroines and women that make poor decisions. Another favourite series of mine is Downside Ghosts by Stacia Kane.
I love that series.
Yeah, it's so good. And I don't know where Stacey Kane has disappeared to, but if she's listening to this, please
we need more books.
Please write more.
First read that book, it was just so different to have the protagonist that Chess was, being an addict and everything like that. That was just so different from a lot of the heroines that were out at that time, and the story's always stuck with me because of that.
Yeah. I mean, she does such frustrating things at times. I mean, you always understand why she does it, knowing that it's the completely wrong thing to do. But like, Chess is such a great character that like you forgive her anyway. And then there's Terrible as well, like because this has
Terrible.
Yeah, because this has a romance thing going through it. And like, if you like an ugly hero, which I do. Terrible is just delicious. He's so good. I know it's like one of Francesca's favorites as well.
Yeah.
And it's so annoying because it just like, so Chess is like a church witch, because stuff had happened and basically didn't the church say actually God is dead, there's no such thing, and they have witches now, but there's something dodgy about the church, and it only just started going into it in the last book that was released, and it's just like I wanted to know like what was going on with like the church which Chess works for, and I'm just like, I need to know. If she could just email me just telling me.
Now I actually want to read it.
Well, I want to read it as well, but if she could just tell me what she had in mind, so that I know.
Closure.
Yeah, I just want. I mean, I'm not sure this is really selling the series because, but it's worth it. It's worth it, even if you get closure at the end of each book, like the thing that had gone wrong or whatever, like gets resolved. But like the overall plot doesn't. And probably never will be resolved, but it is really good. It's worth the frustration to get to know Chess and Terrible.
No, I agree. Even though it's not quite finished, it's still definitely worth a reading.
So, I know that you recently had a book come out, An Echo in the Sorrow, which is book 6 in the Soulbound series. Came out at the beginning of March. So, if it's not too spoilery, what can you tell us about the book?
This is the book where every decision that Patrick has made comes to bite him on the ass.
That's great.
It was subtitled in my head for the duration of writing it of actions have consequences. And they really, really do for Patrick in this book. Because, for the series, he's a federal agent and, he's investigating all of these cases throughout the series, and he's not disclosed with his agency that he's, the head of one of the werepacks and everything, and he's got these biases that you technically should not have if you're a government agent, but he does, and so that impacts a lot of the cases from a legal perspective, and all of that comes to a head with this book, because of the decisions that he's made, while the right decisions for the pack and everything, not necessarily the right legal decision. And, there's outside forces that come to play with it that he has to face. So the decisions that he's made in the past, they were good at the time, but he's got to pay for them now. And so this book is him paying for a lot of those choices.
Oh boy.
Nice. I need to read on in the series to get to this point because I think I finished book 1 like last week. I love having a series ahead of me, so I'm looking forward to reading the rest. Also, I need to point this out to people like me who are really attracted to covers, that this series has some, I say some, every single one of the covers.
They're amazing.
They're so beautiful. They're so nice. Just wanted to say that. So if you're attracted to covers, these ones are good.
They look really good on bookshelves.
Nice. Yeah, I love the colors. I love the graphics. I think that they're really well done. The font, I'm a font person. random, but I like it.
With that, I was really picky when I was having my cover artist do all of these covers. Let's just put it that way.
Well, it's paid off. Also, I noticed you got another series called the Meta Human Files, which I enjoy those covers for a completely different reason.
Those are very, very romance heavy.
Oh, I mean, those abs. I mean, if you like Abby covers, I mean, and who doesn't? These are
when I started writing, and so that was me learning the beats of romance, and it was fun, and I loved it, just exploring those characters in that world. But it is very different from Soulbound in terms of the directions that I took it in and everything. So they are distinct in their genres, but I enjoyed writing both.
They sound good because I read I mean, obviously I saw the cover and I was like, oh, what's this? But no, they sound really good. So I need to get reading that because are they set in the future from the sound of it?
Yeah, there's I describe it kind of like gay X-Men in a near future dystopian world. So it's set on Earth, but like 300 years in the future. So,
nice. I'm sold. I mean,
there's more sex in it than there is in the Soulbound series.
Yeah.
And different plot points and beats for writing purposes in it, but it was still fun.
I mean, you had to be at gay X-Men, to be honest.
It's like gay X-Men.
Sold. Between that and the covers, I'm like, I am there.
Yeah. And I should point out for whoever subscribes to Kindle Unlimited that this whole series is on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have the service, go and binge through the whole thing.
Yeah.
You won't regret it.
Books are also on audio, so...
Oh, awesome. I didn't realize that they were on audio.
I managed to get all of them in last year, so... for people who do like audiobooks, they can just binge all of it.
Awesome. I love audiobooks. Actually, I didn't even realize that they were available. So that's all we have for you guys today. We are so excited and so thankful that Hailey Turner was able to stop by and spend some time with us and chat all things books and the Soulbound series with us. So again, thank you so much, Hailey, for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And now everybody can go and just binge all her books because they're amazing.
Yeah.
And now next week, we're going to continue our Side Changeling series read along, and we're going to be discussing Visions of Heat by Nalini Singh. And I think in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have another Zodiac recommendation, if I'm saying that right, but don't hold me to it.
No idea.
So thanks so much for joining us, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we would appreciate it if you take a few seconds and you rate the podcast. Of course, 5 stars only. If you want to find us in the wild, you can find the Fangover at the Fangover on Instagram and thefangover.com. You can find me in the wild at UTC Book Blog on Instagram and under thecoversbookblog.com.
And you can find me on Instagram at Tales of Suzanne.
You can find me at Hailey Turner Writes on Instagram.
See you guys in the next episode.
Bye.